Black Etc. podcast, a podcast about how ideas and culture spread among Black Americans, especially outside mass media. I'm your host, Ian Youssef. The guest for today's episode is Anela Malik. She's a social media influencer, a food and travel enthusiast and entrepreneur, a writer, and a speaker. She's the creator of the social media account The Anela Malik, formerly Feed the Malik. She's a host of an upcoming Black food and travel series, Our Block, and she's the author of the book, American Soul, The Black History of Food in the United States. I spoke to her a little bit about the book. We spoke about the food culture in D.C. and the DMV area and how that contrasts with that in Northwest Arkansas where she spent some time. And we talked about traveling all over the globe as a Black person. But the bulk of our conversation was centered on her work as a social media creator and a Black woman food and travel entrepreneur. She explained how Black creators like herself do not have as much leeway and dollars, quite frankly, as their white counterparts. So they get paid less, they get fired for less, and how she has to navigate that. We talked about what has become a recurring theme in this podcast, integrity, the concept of selling out, and Black capitalism. And early up front, we talked about the difference between Black culture online and offline. And I thought that was a really interesting portion of the discussion. Anela was an awesome guest, and I hope you enjoy this discussion as much as I did. I'm here today with Anela Malik, writer, speaker, food and travel enthusiast, and social media influencer. She's author of the acclaimed book American Soul, The Black History of Food in the United States, and the host of the Black Food and Travel series, Our Block. Welcome, Anela. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Your book, American Soul, was published last year, correct?
September 2025, which already feels like a lifetime ago.
Can you describe your approach to the book and what you wanted to accomplish with it?
Yeah. So, a topic like Black food and how Black peoples have contributed to American foodways is vast. And my approach was that I wanted my book to be a starting point for people who maybe just wanted to dip their toes in and try cooking more cultural recipes, but also to give them a shared vocabulary, a shared framework to start with. And especially because my publisher is National Geographic, right? You have to think about Nat Geo books. These are educational books often, even if they're driven by personal narrative. And so my approach was to do essentially a wide literature review and then try to weave together a narrative that touches on history and place while also recognizing the vast diversity that is Black contribution and Black culture.
Mm-hmm. A while ago, you compiled the Black-owned guide of Black food spots and restaurants in the DMV that were being ignored by the mainstream sites that do regional spotlight and best of lists. I'm curious about what are the channels or were the channels through which knowledge of these Black food places spread amongst Black folks? Because it's not those mainstream sites.
Yeah. And so this is such an interesting question, right? And there are reasons why mainstream media is less likely to cover a Black-owned business or a business owned by another marginalized person. And a lot of it does come down to money, frankly, right? Black owners and founders, they start with less capital. They're less likely to have employees, and they're far less likely to have PR agents. Mm. And as someone who's on the receiving end of a lot of, PR press releases and pitches, having someone on your team who's dedicated to telling your story in a coherent way and getting that story in front of people who can put it in a magazine, put it in a newspaper, it really helps you get listed. And it helps you win awards. That's just the reality of it. And without having a dedicated PR person, right, we see Black-owned restaurants just kind of being left in this in-between space where whether or not they're doing well, unless they're leaning more towards maybe fine dining, have a famous founder, or just have more capital, they're not going to be found in the same ways. So they might not make it into Eater or a Resi Roundup, but they will be talked about at parties. Mm. I spend a lot of time online, but I'm thinking about when I go out in the world and I'm in community with Black people. there's always a recommendation for a Black-owned spot going back and forth. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it's something that we do pretty consciously as a community. And especially for restaurants, bars, spas, yoga studios, like those are the types of things my friends and I, over cocktails, over dinner, at a party, at, a gathering, we will trade that information. And it is also shared on social media, right? We are in an environment where people spend more and more time on their phones. They spend more and more time connecting in a digital way rather than IRL, which I think definitely has some positive and negative impacts on our social development and our communal bonds.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just the reality. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of it. And to this day, that Black-owned DC guide, I still update it every year. I still go out in the community and talk to people and see what I'm hearing about from friends and what I'm hearing about from people in the restaurant industry in DC who are in the know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a living, breathing guide because we are far beyond the Black Squares era of 2020. And while we've seen major media organizations promise to do better, and I think there has been incremental changes, we are also seeing that many of them, their staff has been gutted, their budgets have been slashed, and some of them have gone back to the same old, as they were before they made all those commitments.
Yeah. I also think about the genre of Black people reviewing food and cars, They're not reviewing mainstream restaurants for the most part, right? They're reviewing Black restaurants that most people have never heard of in the mainstream and that a lot of times I haven't even heard of, and I like food.
Yeah. The car thing is, so I don't have a car.
Uh-huh.
And it's always wild to me. I'm like, man, I see some of these places and I'm like, that would be an hour and a half by public transit to get there. That's out of my radius.
Yeah.
But they do fill a need and they fill a gap in the market where places that haven't been heard of may never get listed. You would never try otherwise. They're going to put you on.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit like online versus IRL. What, in your experience, are some of the key differences in online versus offline Black culture?
Ooh. Okay. So I sometimes think I'm trying to figure out how to frame this in a way that makes sense, right? Because I spend a lot of time online. So my impression is that in general, on the internet, things become amplified, and become more exaggerated. So for example, I think a part of Black culture is that we joke about things that other people are like, that is not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
We will make light of the worst of times. And I think it's a coping mechanism, but it's also just a sense of humor that involves like dark humor, ragging on people, right? If we like you, we're probably going to make fun of you.
Yeah.
And in fact, sometimes, I think that is just part of our shared experience is like being roasted. No matter how uncomfortable it is, it's something we all had to get used to, right? And then I think on the internet, that's amplified. So I see in Black spaces on the internet, that same sense of humor, but it moves way faster. Or it might be a little more dark or more cynical. So kind of this sense of exaggeration, I think, is one thing that I do see happening in web spaces. And what else? The difference is information moves faster. But that's not a cultural thing. That is just the environment we live in.
Yeah.
But I think the exchange of information and the exchange of even cultural practice has become more rapid, but also dispersed outwards. So what I mean by that is, for example, Black people love to line dance, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always a line dance. And as somebody who, I like to go to parties and I like to dance and I like to be IRL with people. I'm not an internet person that just wants to stay on the internet. I'm an extrovert. I like to go out and do things.
Mm-hmm.
And the last maybe 5 to 10 years, I feel like when I go out, I'm like, the new line dances, they're coming faster. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm getting old. I'm in my 30s. But how do we have so many new dances so fast?
Right.
And it's this like almost like the cultural progression is happening faster. The innovation is happening faster, but it's also dispersing outwards. And what I mean by that is I can't tell you how many creators I've blocked who I'm sure some of them are perfectly wonderful people, but why does this white man from New York or Boston talk like a Southern Black woman?
Yeah.
He does, because our slang, our intonation, the way we put a joke together and then, put words together and flip them, that now is pop culture. And a lot of people don't recognize that as Black culture. So when I talk about like Black culture being amplified and also sped up and dispersed, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Why do you think more Black online creators like yourself are moving to subscription models?
There's many, many reasons for that. One, I think a lot of people in general are moving to subscription models, not just Black creators. It's a response to the fact that content creation is work that is deeply undervalued by our society. And there's, the top 1% of creators might capture 80% of all of the revenue in the whole industry. And the rest of us are left fighting for scraps. But also, I think it's a direct response to the fact that we are held to a different standard and we are paid less than our white counterparts. And I've seen that play out in my career. I worked with a brand that I found out after the partnership that they paid a white creator who had her engagement was worse than mine. Her video didn't perform well. Her reach is worse than mine. They paid her significantly more than they paid me. And that's across the board, right? We have studies that show that the pay gap is 35% for Black and white creators. And I think in many cases it can be worse. And when I say held to a higher standard, I mean that we are expected to be unimpeachable, perfect. You can't have a scandal. You can't speak out of turn. Don't ever bring up politics if you're trying to get paid. Those types of things where our white counterparts, they don't have the same limitations on how they can behave or the things they can do. And we see that play out over and over and over again. And I see this playing out actually right now a lot in leftist political spaces online over Black female creators being paid for their work with the Democratic Party or Democratic institutions and really being called out for being paid as if they must suffer and be poor to help protect our democracy. And frankly, white women are not held to those standards.
One of the things I admire about your work on social media is transparency. So you do have a lot of stuff where you're talking about everything is not all glitz and glamour, but particularly I appreciate that you will often say, I turn down money. All money's not good money. In a genre or in an era where like everything is associated with get the bag, why is it important for you to highlight that particular aspect of your business?
Okay. I'm going to say this because we're amongst us. Because I know people are going to hate it. I have real issues with this particular brand of Black capitalism that I find to be very prevalent on social media. And I say Black capitalism, and white people have their own version of this, right? Like, it's not like it's just us, but I associate it with like Divine Nine, hustle culture,
LLC Twitter.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I do.
And so I think that a lot of that advice is destructive for us in many ways, and particularly for us and for our community. One, none of it, I think, really recognizes the dynamics of being a Black business owner, which means you will have significant challenges that are not going to be similar to other people's challenges. You can't hustle your way out of structural racism. Hustle culture is not the same for us. And I also think, and this is just my personal belief, right, that what's the point of building a brand if that brand is not something I could be proud of when I'm talking to my parents or if I was talking to my grandma? And what's the point of building a brand if in building it, I'm doing things that are detrimental to my community? And look, capitalism harms us all. And I'm not saying that I'm an anti-capitalist. Like, I like the freedom that money brings to my life, but I don't need to make $1 billion because I don't think you can be an ethical billionaire. I would like to make enough money to pay my team well and give them the kind of pay and benefits that they deserve, and to occasionally take some vacations and to save for retirement. That's it. And I think that there has to be a way to do that without exploiting people, without exploiting our people, and also without exploiting people overseas. Because especially in digital spaces, a lot of people are like, hire someone in Southeast Asia and pay them $3 an hour. And I'm like, why would I do that when I can afford more? Even if I'm going to hire someone in another country, why would I not pay more because I can afford more? The idea of just hustling my way into, multiple millions of dollars without any sort of thought about what it's going to do to the people I have to step on to get there is just not how I want to be successful. And I think that there has to be another path, especially for Black people, if we're talking about building capital, not just for us, but for our community as a whole. Yeah. Because if I'm just an outright capitalist like Elon Musk, I don't give a fuck if I'm screwing over Black people to get there.
Yeah. The concept of selling out, that's done in popular culture. And a lot of people really criticize the youth. When you look, they have never heard of the term. Selling out, they think it's just like a disparaging way that people talk about anybody making any kind of money. The idea that there are things that money cannot buy and that you have to push back against, and there are boundaries, there are like core principles. That has been kind of driven out of the community. It's not their fault. It's the culture's fault. That's where it's heading. So yeah, again, I do appreciate people like yourself, people like KJ Kearney and others who have integrity and are clear about the fact that there are principles and there are boundaries, there are things that they will not do for money. And it's important to highlight that.
Yeah. I will say, and this was part of the pitch that we made last year when I crowdfunded for this Black food and travel series that we shot last year, that we're working through the process of getting it ready. It's going to come out this year. And, we raised $65,000. And part of what I said during that pitch, which I hope it resonated, it seems to have resonated, was that if we want Black creators in Black media, we're going to have to figure out ways to pay them. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to figure out ways to pay for projects that institutions and people in power don't think are worthwhile. And that's going to mean it's going to have to come from us, or from buying their products, or going to their events, or joining their subscription communities. Like, I think that, and I always try to add this nuance when we have the conversation about principles and capitalism, is that everybody has bills to pay. And we're not going to get to where we want to go, where we have, independent voices in media and Black people doing cool shit, if we don't find ways to fund those Black people doing cool shit. Because it's not going to come from other people. It's going to come from us.
Yeah. You were talking about the Hour Block series, right? I wanted to just give you a little bit of time to just pitch it and say what it's about.
Yeah. So last year, we crowdfunded for and shot with a full production crew, very long days, a series called Hour Block, which goes through 5 different cities in the United States from coast to coast. And we sat down with Black people in those spaces, business owners, artists, activists, and just tried to dig into what makes their community special. What do they want for the future? What are they worried about or working on in this climate? And what we are trying to do is tell a story about what it means to be Black in America, but also what it means to try to build something in this time when Black institutions are under attack. All of the, signaling of 2020 has been largely rolled back. It is now, again, a dirty word to be proudly Black, I would say, in much of our media environment. And so Hour Block will debut, I'll say June, hopefully, of 2026. And it is our love letter to our community. And we see that not only is independent media under attack in the United States, but also the kinds of Black programming that often gets greenlit, Blaxploitation.
Yeah. It's performing for white audiences.
It's caricatures, Blaxploitation, sex, drugs, and rap. And I love rap music. I love all sorts of Black music. I like to go shake my ass. But there's more to us than that. And there's always been more to us than that. Yeah. And so, we are trying to bring just a different look to what is essentially a food and travel series. And if you think about, especially like think about food media, who gets shows? White dudes.
Mm-hmm.
It's Anthony Bourdain and Stanley Tucci. And, there's been even some creators that I love who have kind of leveraged into traditional media in the food and travel space. They're all men.
Yeah.
We love putting a man on a plane and making him the expert and the cultural explorer.
Right.
And we don't offer that same space for Black people, especially Black women, to serve as, cultural translators and ambassadors and experts.
Yeah. They did have Elisa from My Two Cents. She had a brief one on Hulu for a minute. Elisa Reynolds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You spent some time in Northwest Arkansas. How does the food culture there differ from, for example, the DMV?
Well, I think Northwest Arkansas, like modern day, right? Because I don't have historical context there, but modern day Northwest Arkansas is very much figuring out its identity. And that also, I think, relates to food as well, right? It's a place where there's a lot of newcomers driven by Walmart is headquartered there and a couple other very large companies. So driven by these large companies who brought in their workers and workers from all over the world who are coming with money and their own preferences, right? So really diverse array of tastes, but it's still a really small market. And so much of the food offerings there are new, so much turnover, so much brand new. So it just feels like a space that's still figuring out what it wants to be, and very different than other parts of Arkansas, right? Because other parts of the state, you had parts of Arkansas were part of the Cotton Belt. So, a 4-hour drive away, maybe longer, you get historic Black-owned barbecue places and Black-owned spots where people go for fish fries. But Northwest Arkansas doesn't have that. So I would say it's still figuring itself out and has this sense that every few years, everything turns over. Whereas DC is a much bigger city and is so historic. And I know it's not Chocolate City anymore, but I came here for the first time, I think 13 or 14 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And DC was the first place that I ever really saw Black people doing everything. Right? Like not just cooking and working in service jobs, but like as doctors and professors. And there was and still is a lot of Black entrepreneurs and artists here. And so I think DC has a really vibrant food space, though I know it doesn't have the best soul food. Everybody is always upset about that. But it does have a really vibrant space. And a lot of that vibrancy is driven by us. Even right now, I think that there is a renaissance happening in DC currently in Black and diaspora fine dining specifically that is unmatched anywhere else. We have Dogon, which is Chef Kwame's award-winning restaurant, which I still think is my favorite restaurant in the country. And I eat out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We have Chef Eric Ajapong's Elmina, which is a Ghanaian tasting menu. Marcus DC, which has a really diverse and young team, which is cool, right? So people still really growing into their work and who are going to do amazing things no matter where they go.
Yeah.
And there's a few other places as well, right? This is a city where you can get some of the best fine dining in the country, and you're going to walk in and it's the whole space is just Black as fuck.
Yeah.
And it's, older Black folks on dates and Black girls' nights, and the music is amazing and the food is good. And so, that kind of culture still exists in DC. I think you just have to, one, seek it out, and two, you have to be willing to support it, right? We won't have Black spaces if we don't intentionally support Black spaces.
Yeah. Like me, you like to travel internationally to countries that most Americans won't even consider. How do you think ideas about Black travel practices and destinations have changed since you first began traveling?
I think social media has opened up for Black Americans a whole wide world that maybe they hadn't considered before. I host group trips. I get a lot of people who come on my trips or who DM me and they're like, I never thought about Oman or Morocco or Egypt, but I see like us traveling there. So what's it like? And I do think we only are aware of what we've been exposed to. So for Americans in general, our country is so large that I think it's quite the feat to leave the United States. I don't want to talk about travel like, oh, everybody should. No, it's actually, it's a privilege. And for many of us, that means getting on a plane, right? Europeans love to talk about how Americans don't leave the country, but that's because to go from country to country is like a 2-hour train ride. It's a very different experience. So I think social media has shown so many more Americans and Black Americans what's possible. And then on the flip side, it's shown other people outside of the US so much more about Black culture. So before social media, people's ideas of Americans were, and to this day, for many of them, their ideas are the same, that America's like a bunch of white dudes, right? Like, they look at our presidents, they might see America in the news, and that's what they think. And they consumed a lot of American pop culture, which is Black culture, but they maybe weren't aware that it was Black culture, right? And now more and more, I think outside of the US, people are aware of how much music and slang and dance and food comes from the Black community. Whereas maybe before it just would have been, well, that's just American. So I think the exchange is in both directions. But the one change I would love to see people make, I want Black Americans to stop asking, do they like Black people there?
Yes, I can't stand that.
So, and I'll say this as somebody, right, who's traveled a lot by myself, and I've been to places where like I'm the first Black American they've ever seen. And so here's the thing: anti-Black racism is a global phenomenon.
Yes,
you are never going to go to a place where we can escape it, and your experiences are going to be shaped by the color of your skin and also by how dark you are, your hair, all of these things. But you can get shot in America for being Black.
Yeah.
And in fact, in many of these places that you might be worried about whether or not they like Black people, you would be safer.
Right.
And on top of that, we have a particular relationship with race in the United States because of our history and the one drop rule. And other countries, yes, anti-Black racism is going to be present, but it's not the same relationship to race as maybe the primary organizing structure of their social hierarchy, right? Because they don't have those same historical experiences, practices, and laws that were in place. So there are places where I definitely think and have felt, yeah, there's a little racism here, but also have felt like, I do think maybe socioeconomic class in this country is likely going to be the biggest determining factor for how you're treated. So I think asking, do they like Black people there is not the right question. I understand wanting to go to a place and just feel free and feel safe, but you're never going to escape racism. And what you will find is that you won't have the same experience in the same country twice. Right. It could be great one day. You could have a really rude taxi driver who calls you a name the next day. And that's just because people are people, and you're never going to escape the humanity of it no matter where you go.
Yeah. And also the fact is that us as Black Americans do not have the same relationship with those countries, right? So you're in France, they may be all about Black Americans, but they have a different relationship to Black Africans, or if they think you're an immigrant or something. So it's like, there's no such thing as do they like Black people. That doesn't make any sense.
And ultimately, I just think who fucking cares? And especially in travel, I think this a lot. I like to do a lot of outdoorsy stuff. I hike. I've gone on some really big treks. I've climbed some big mountains. I've gone to Patagonia and Antarctica. And sometimes I'll get the that's white people shit. And I'm like, why are we giving up our right to enjoy and reclaim the most beautiful, pristine, pollution-free places on Earth? Why are we just saying, oh, white people can have that? It's the nicest. We should have a slice of it too.
Right.
And for many of our ancestors, and not even that far back, I'm talking about our grandparents. What do you mean they wasn't outside? Mm-hmm. We are erasing our own history to say that, oh, that's for white people.
Right. So what other projects are you working on that you can share?
The biggest one this year is getting our blog out into the world. And the other is standing up the next batch of group trips that we're hosting. So I started hosting group trips on a whim in 2021 because people kept asking me to, not necessarily because I thought it was going to be this grand, idea in business. And it's become the most fun and rewarding part of my work. So I think of myself as the curator, right? I pick the experiences, I pick the providers. I want to make sure we have an incredible time. But more than anything, I try to make space for people to come on these experiences and show up as they are. And so, a lot of my work in the travel space and these trips has been disrupted because I woke up one day and our fuck-ass president decided to bomb another country. And I was like, oh, here we go. And I have a long-standing interest in and relationship to the Middle East, and it feels like my second home. So it was very disruptive personally and work-wise. But I'm trying to take the disruption there as an opportunity to expand my offerings and give people something new. So talking about how I don't think, we should cede all of the beautiful places to white people. I've been to Patagonia a few times, and I really, really loved it, and it's gorgeous. And not only is there incredible nature and you can go see penguins and you can walk on glaciers, but there's also some of the best wines in the world, right? And so I'm putting together a Patagonia food and wine experience where we're going to start with a Black History tour in Buenos Aires in Argentina. We're going to go over to wine country and have this incredible wine experience. And then we're going to go down into a little bit more of a rural part of Patagonia, into like some of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And I'm really putting that together as an opportunity because so many Black women especially are on my trips, and that's my target market, to be like, we can do this together, and also we should have access to these spaces too. And so that's been a big focus of mine, is trying to build something that I feel like is enriching. And all of my trips are have some little subversive element, right? So if we go to Jordan with me, you're going to have the best time. I lived in Jordan for 2.5 years. I know it very, very well. But also, there's going to be moments where we have dinner with a Palestinian chef, and we are on a tour with a Palestinian refugee. In Morocco, we spend some time with Amazigh families, right, who are from a marginalized ethnic group. And similar to, Argentina going to do a Black History tour in a country that very consciously tried to erase Blackness. And so I try to create the kinds of experiences that if someone was coming to the States and trying to learn about us, I would hope that they had stuff like this on their itineraries as well.
All right. So now we get to the portion of questions I ask every guest. The first one is, what songs got people on a dance floor when you were going out dancing at your peak?
Okay. So that's so funny because I went to a 90s R&B dance party. It was like late 90s, early 2000s R&B dance party 2 weeks ago in DC. And it was the same music. I think 2000s hip hop and R&B, it's like feel good music for me. And that's what got people on the dance floor. And it was fun because a lot of people will say, oh, well, people don't dance at parties anymore. And I found that to be true to an extent. But at this party, there were no phones. Everybody was dancing.
What is a Black cultural work that's a classic but is underappreciated?
So it's so funny you sent me these questions in advance, and I was like, I have nothing for that one. I have nothing for that one. So I'm mixed, and I have an Asian mom. And so my dad spent a lot of time very consciously as a kid trying to make sure that I was connected to Black people and understood Black culture and our history, which, with Black dads is not always the case. And that's not just with Black dads. With dads, I will say it's not always the case because a lot of cultural preservation work within the family happens from moms, right? It's why you're much more likely to speak a second language if your mom spoke it rather than if your dad spoke it, there's a far greater likelihood that you're not going to speak that language. But my dad was very much like, not my kids are Black, and they're going to know that, and they're going to understand what that means. And so, so I'm thinking about, what are all these cultural works that we had when I was a kid? And our house was like a library, like wall to wall bookshelves everywhere. And even movies. We have the John Singleton box set. And right, he was like, nah, you're going to know. And so it's interesting now that even a lot of the books that I read then are still classics. I don't think they're underappreciated, though. I think we understand why they resonate so much within the culture and the literature, and that's why they're classics.
And what particular dish did your family make that you looked forward to the most?
Oh, always gumbo. And gumbo was a special occasion dish. Like, you're not getting that every week. So if Dad was making seafood gumbo, like, it was a treat. And he would always put crab legs, so then you could crack the crab legs open and suck out the juice.
Yeah. I only know it with crab legs.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Yeah. Well, Anela Malik, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you online?
Thank you. You can find me on all the platforms at the Anela Malik, and my website is anelamalik.com. And if you're interested in traveling with me or learning more about my work, all those places you'll be able to see.
All right. Thanks so much. Hopefully we can do this again.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Take care. I would like to thank my guest again, Anela Malik. You can find her at her website, anelamalik.com. That's ANELAMALIK.com. Her Instagram and TikTok handles are at the Anela Malik, no spaces. Please check out her book, American Soul, The Black History of Food in the United States, and be on the lookout for the airing of her travel series, Our Block. There's a couple things that come to mind as far as lessons, but before I get to the actual lessons, I wanted to just note something that I noticed when we were speaking about the amazing renaissance of diaspora food in Washington, D.C., the area where we both live. She mentioned Dogon, Elmina, Marcus, D.C., all chef-driven, fine dining, African and Caribbean influenced food. There's also, outside of D.C., ones that are getting recognition is Dakar Nola, which is a fantastic Senegalese fine dining restaurant in New Orleans. One of my favorite meals in recent years was there. There's also Kabawa in New York. That's Paul Carmichael's place, Caribbean influenced fine dining. And there are others as well. But I did note that all of those, the ones that are right now getting attention, they are diaspora food, but they're specifically African or Caribbean. They do have influence from African American cuisine, but I think what's lifting them in this moment is the idea that these black cuisines are exotic. I'm putting exotic in quote marks. Nothing against them, it's awesome. But I think the buzz that black American fine dining-ish food had a few years back with Virtue still going strong in Chicago, June Baby in Seattle, which is now closed for reasons other than the food, I think. The Gray in Savannah. I just don't think the African American based fine dining has that same kind of buzz right now. And I think that has to do more with fine dining wanting to find new foreign ethnic cuisines to fold into the standard French and Japanese template of high-end dining. Other communities, you have high-end Korean doing gangbusters in New York with Awijimi, Jua, Jungsik, etc. You have high-end Filipino, so Kasama in Chicago and Caillou here in DC. And so the fact that high-end African-American cuisine is no longer kind of at the forefront or as hip as other cuisines has more to do with the fact that it's American and not foreign than anything else, I think. But that was just an observation. One lesson I took away, again, a repeated one, is that some things are not for sale. Integrity over money. We have to do things as black folks, especially black folks who are in the world and trying to make money, engaging with folks that our people and our ancestors can be proud of. This is a decidedly anti-sellout venture. And I mean that not be broke all the time. I mean that in the sense of betraying your principles for money is one of the worst things you can do. Another lesson came when we were discussing international travel as Black people. Anela was talking about her disdain for the question that Black people ask her, do they like Black people there? I couldn't agree more. I find that really off-putting and sad. Asking, do they like Black people in X country, in addition to just not making any sense, suggests to me a very low level of racial self-esteem and a need for external validation, which I totally understand, but is not something that we should embrace or encourage. So I think the lesson is, stop looking for people to love you, to like you in such a superficial way, and more broadly, stop seeking external validation. Look from within. As always, please like, rate, review, subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen. Please visit the website, blacketcpod.com. Until next time.